Now, an antiques dealer and her husband have been fined £3,000 after a migrant snuck into their vehicle at the French border.
Well, Ed Masters, who had borrowed a van to help his wife Janie Cave, reported the incident to Suffolk Police. However, he was held responsible for not securing the vehicle properly.
Well, last night, Janie spoke to Patrick Christie's, and this is what she had to say.
We got to Barton Mills, and the migrant got tapped like this 3 times on the van. We thought, oh, please say it's not a migrant. It is a migrant. The migrant got caught by the police and taken to a house, which I'm not allowed to say the name of. And then I got interrogated for 2 hours. The guy checked the van. Nobody else in there.
Have you now got a criminal conviction as well for this?
Ed has got, not a criminal conviction, but he's got a fine of £3,000.
Well, you can catch more interviews like that, along with big debates and even bigger guests on Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. And that conversation last night has inspired our debate today.
Yes, we're joined by Research Director for the Centre for Migration Control, Rob Bates, alongside former Chief Immigration Officer at Border Force, Kevin Saunders. Good to see you both this morning. Rob, what do you reckon? I mean, clearly, the van can't have been locked, can't have been properly secured, can it, for this young man to get in?
Well, I think this is a case study in everything that's wrong with our borders. I think, we've got the French authorities doing these checks on their side of the channel and clearly not doing it competently enough, given that this chap was going undetected. We've then got the Border Force absolutely swarming over this couple, using their resources, I'd argue, not very effectively. I mean, I think the chap has been now pulled over 4 times subsequently at airports and ports. And then we've got, ultimately, the British taxpayer getting walloped as well, because, these guys have now suffered a £3,000 fine. So I think, in a nutshell, this is everything that is going wrong with the migration crisis. And if this is the government's plan of smashing the gangs, then I think we're in a lot of trouble.
Kevin, I mean, it doesn't seem fair, does it? This couple have done the right thing. They've reported that the migrant was in their vehicle, that he'd managed to get away. They will be thinking now, well, if that ever happens again, they simply won't report it. They just let him go off into the wilderness.
These people are extremely lucky that they've only got a £3,000 fine. If this had happened in France, then the driver of the van could well be facing 3 months in a French prison. The rule is that the driver of the vehicle is responsible for the security of the vehicle. And if the vehicle is not secure and people get in, and there's no argument about whether you tell the police, whether you don't tell the police, but if you bring somebody in an unsecured vehicle, then you are liable for a civil penalty. Now, as I say, if this had happened in France, the vehicle would have been destroyed, and the individual may well have gone to prison for 3 months.
Rob, what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, that in itself is ultimately indicative of how things have gone so wrong. We're talking about the rules here, but yet we have had, in the last 4 years, we've had 150,000 people break into the country. So we're not quite enforcing the rules, perhaps, as stridently and as across the board as we should be. I think the question needs to be as well, if it's a £3,000 fine, how much are we now going to fine the RNLI and the useful idiots at Care for Calais that are absolutely facilitating the flows over the channel and the illegal migrants that are breaking into our country? I mean, we can get stuck in the technicalities, but I think common sense would mandate that these people aren't those that are trying to engage in any form of people smuggling, and therefore the idea that they've had the absolute book thrown at them, whereas those that are breaking into the country have been able to live a life of luxury in 4-star hotels is really, really telling.
Kevin, isn't a part of this down to Border Force and not doing the correct checks on these vehicles?
No, because we haven't had 150,000 people break into the country through Calais or the Channel Tunnel in the last year. These people have come across on boats which Border Force can't control. At the Channel Tunnel and at Calais and Dunkirk, we can control it, and we do control it. It's not 100%, but we get most of them. This one slipped through. Perhaps it shouldn't have done, but as I say, if it hadn't slipped through, then the consequences for this couple would have been far, far worse.
Yeah, but I tell you what, Kevin, Rob makes a good point, doesn't he, when he just talks about common sense. You know, these people, this sort of ordinary couple, if you like, clearly didn't do this intentionally. Clearly, they thought they were doing the right thing by notifying the authorities when they discovered this man. Where is the common sense in all of this?
This couple did not follow the rules correctly. They did not have their vehicles secured. Now, I've been in Calais. I've looked at this sort of case. We actually discovered a very senior retired police officer in more or less exactly the same position as this couple, although he was actually discovered in France. He was arrested. The French kept him in custody for 3 days. They destroyed the vehicle he was travelling in and banned him from France for 5 years. So the French take it very, very seriously, and so they should, and so should we. And I'm sorry, if this couple don't secure their vehicle properly, then this is the consequence.
We need to take it more seriously.
Well, I think ultimately the buck stops with border force. I think, we've got between 800,000 and 1.2 million illegal migrants currently in our country. Not everyone has come over the boats, not everyone has come in the back of vans, people have overstayed visas and whatnot. But the fact of the matter is that we have those that are meant to be protecting our borders, keeping our borders secure and sovereign, have been far too lax for far too long. And the crisis that we're now seeing in the Channel is really only the tip of the iceberg. As I say, 1.2 million ultimately that could be living in the country illegally. It's an absolutely staggering figure.
OK, Rob Bates, Kevin Saunders, good to see you both this morning. Let's just tell you what the Home Office has said about all of this. They said, we're fully committed to stopping people from illegally entering the country and cracking down on people smugglers. The clandestine entrant civil penalty scheme aims to ensure drivers are taking every reasonable step to deter irregular migration and disrupt people smugglers.
It is understood the fines are only issued when Border Force officers consider that they have significant evidence. Well, do let us know what you think about that. gbnews.com/you will say.
Yeah.
David says the treatment of the couple reporting this migrant in their car is utterly absurd. Is this kind of small nibbling away of decent, normal behaviour that ends up with people distrusting the whole system?
Actually, that's a really good point. I think it's a really well put point, David, that because it is that nibbling away thing where you just think, why are we even bothering?
Well, other couples just won't report it to the authorities.
No.
If it were to happen to them,
Yeah.
wouldn't risk it. We're going through the papers now. Deputy Editor of Spite, Fraser Myers, and writer and commentator Candice Holdsworth. Very good morning to you both. Good to see you.
Good morning.
Fraser, should we have a look at Rachel Reeves, who is rethinking the non-dom tax? Not going to raise as much money as they thought, it would seem.
It might not raise any money at all, is one of the big fears. So
when it was paying for everything.
Yeah, exactly. This was going to pay for just about every election pledge that the Labour Party made. Earlier, when the first estimates were brought out, Rachel Reeves thought it was going to raise over £3 billion. Just in the run-up to the election, then that went down to about £1 billion, and now the Treasury are fearing it might raise nothing at all. Now, as people might understand, raising taxes, particularly on the wealthy, is a very tricky balancing act because they can simply leave the country if they feel they're being taxed too much. Now, people might see the non-dom tax as unfair, are the super rich getting concessions that ordinary people might not get, but let's not forget this is money that people have actually earned overseas rather than in the UK. The Tories already made a few tweaks to it as well. And Rachel Reeves wanted to go further, but yeah, it looks like they're going to scrap it. What's the point of raising, what's the point of imposing a tax that doesn't raise any money? The point is to bring money in for the exchequer, not just to make a statement about wealth inequality.
Yeah, but the problem with this is it's optics, isn't it? Because it's still going to look like, a lot of people might not like changing non-dom status. It now says, well, we'll leave them alone and we'll rob the pensioners.
Oh, it just looks terrible. The problem is, once again, it's an argument for pragmatism. You might not like the idea of non-doms, but the fact is you have to go with the way people behave, not how you'd like them to behave. And when people are highly mobile and you've got competitive tax regimes all over the world, they can leave and they can do what they want to do. But I think it's so true. It does put the Labour government in a very difficult position because it's, the pensioners, they've got nowhere to go. But with non-doms, because of how highly mobile they are, you can't go after them, and the optics are terrible.
And one of the things that is worth stressing, and one of the reasons Rachel Reeves is so constrained, is the fact that in the UK already, the overwhelming majority of tax is paid for by people who are wealthy and who have money. So actually compared with Europe, if you were in France or in Germany, if you were middle class, you would be paying a lot more tax than in the UK. We don't think that. It's not part of the sort of narrative. It's certainly not a narrative that the Conservatives wanted to put out. No. They wanted to appear as if they're doing well for wealth creators and things like that, but even if they weren't. Labour obviously doesn't want to admit that either, that the Conservatives were taxing the rich a lot more than it seemed. But, yeah, that essentially means that every tax rise or every spending cut that Rachel Reeves makes is going to be unpopular because it's not going to fall on, people with the broader shoulders.
I just find it extraordinary that the Labour has handed themselves a loaded gun.
Yes.
2 months into an election.
Well, I think, from what I'm hearing, even on the grassroots, people are just so confused about this Labour government. They're just like, this goes against what we think Labour are. And I think this is what's going to happen in a time of crisis like ours. I don't think that you can be ideological. You're going to have to just deal with things case by case by case. But Labour have just made such a song and dance about themselves, and they're always so moralistic. So, like with anyone who's very moralistic, you're going to get caught out in hypocrisy sooner or later.
And we heard that even at the Labour conference, didn't we? We had a head of the union standing up and saying, this is not what we voted for, this is not what we stand for.
Yeah.
Candice, can we have a look at the Telegraph? Because I think this is fascinating. The awful story of Nicola Bulley, who went missing in a river.
Yes.
And it took ages to find her body. But the pressure and the social media pressure and everything else that went around it, there's this story now about just what that did to the family.
Yes, I find this so interesting as well. So this Daily Telegraph story is about a new documentary that's coming out on the BBC about what the family went through and exactly how you explained it. It's going to feature her husband, Paul Ansell, who was subject to something that I call toxic attention on social media. So what people do is they become interested in a story, they become interested in a person, and they become very negatively obsessed with it and conspiratorial, and they can subject this person to all types of wild speculation. And he was particularly subject to it because people started accusing him of having something to do with her disappearance. They were even privately messaging him on social media. This is a man going through profound trauma, and you have people accusing him of doing the absolute worst thing. And apparently one of the things he's going to say in the documentary was he couldn't even respond to people sending him messages because as soon as he did that, he knew it would be screenshotted and shared on social media. And I've seen it with influencers. There'll be a certain subsection of their audience which will just turn against them, and they'll just start spinning wild tales about them, and there's very little you can do about it. You can say that people like that invite attention. Someone like Paul Ansell didn't at all.
No.
It's something that we really have to contend with in our era, especially when you've got such a huge interest in true crime now.
Yeah.
It's and you had lots of amateur detectives going down there and thinking that they could solve the crime.
And we're seeing this more and more, aren't we, Fraser? We saw it at Nicola Bulley, one of the first instances of it, and at Jay Slater more recently. These armchair detectives coming out of the woodwork. And it really can damage the family.
It can, especially when people start going around accusing the family of all kinds of things. And I remember also, I think someone was done for harassment against, some of the victims, or family members of victims of the Manchester Arena bombing, assuming that they were somehow involved in a conspiracy, or quite famously the Sandy Hook shooting, where Alex Jones, would put out the idea that the children were fake and they were crisis actors. That meant that the family members were then targeted for abuse. I think, it's a sign of the kind of darkness of conspiracy theories and conspiratorial thinking, and it has to be called out.
Yeah. Here's some good news, which I can hardly believe my eyes, Fraser. It's in the Telegraph. Apparently, petrol's going to get cheaper.
Yes, amazingly, thanks to Saudi Arabia, not a phrase I often want to say.
Well, no, good on them. That's what I say.
So thank you to Riyadh. They've decided they're going to up their oil production, even though it's going to cost them, because essentially they've realised they don't have as much power as they're used to. OPEC, the Organisation of Petroleum Exporting Countries, they have less of a grip on the market than they once did, mostly because America is now such a big producer of fossil fuels, and their attempts to essentially force the price up have failed. They've acknowledged that, so they're they're going to put production up, and that means the price of petrol down over here will go up or go down at the pump. But, you know, Mrs. Reeves might be waiting. She might use this as an excuse to put up some taxes on petrol in the budget. So, you know, it's not often that you'd say, hooray, Saudi Arabia, boo to the Labour, the UK government, but there you go. Yeah. What a strange world we live in.
Oh, isn't it just?
It is. Candice, should we talk about something nice and happy?
OK.
It's Princess Catherine.
Yeah.
A secret trip to the ballet yesterday at the end of her chemotherapy treatment.
Yeah, so this is a nice story in The Sun. It's about how Catherine she went to go see a ballet. She went to go see Giselle at Sadler's Wells. She's a big lover of the arts. And it's so lovely to see her kind of doing normal things again, because I think people get so worried about her. They know she's ill. She's out of the public eye. She absolutely should be. She needs privacy when she's ill. But I think people now see that, OK, she's in some sort of recovery. Her chemotherapy is over. But it's also good to see her doing things on her own terms. And she's sort of returning to work slowly, and she's doing very little events, and she's not getting back into it too quickly, because I think that is, like we were talking about with the toxic attention on social media, she got a lot of toxic attention.
Did.
Yeah.
Shockingly so. And what you don't want is for her her behaviour to be shaped by that. So, you know, you want her to be able to slowly return to work, recover, because she's had a very serious illness. She is obviously a public figure and she needs to manage that image, but in a healthy way.
I don't know if I'd call going to the ballet a everyday activity.
Well, it's a treat.
A treat, though.
Yeah.
A very nice
Well,
treat if you
treat.
like that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
She has said before in a walkabout, obviously before she got ill, she was saying that Princess Charlotte really loves ballet.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Loves dancing. Apparently she really is ballet and tap.
Oh.
So maybe she was there with Princess Charlotte.
That's
I
a
don't know.
nice thing to do.
But that's
with
quite
your
nice,
child.
yeah.
Yeah.
Lovely. It's just nice to see her out and about, I think.
Should we go to the ballot?
I don't know if you'd love the ballot. I'd like to go see Swan Lake at Christmas if you'd like to take me.
Yes, I'd like to go with you. I am not buying your ticket.
I can highly recommend
I'm always
There
trying to
you
get him to pay for my stuff, but it hasn't worked so far.
There you go. Out of time.